over the past, well, certainly since I've been here, so a year and a half, we got to meet this wonderful, loving young man who has become such a valuable member of our community. Troy, we call him TJ. Come on, Troy. Troy has shared a little bit of his journey, just a tiny bit of his journey with some of us. And so today, as we talk about transitioning, Jesus went on top of the mountain and he transfigured for his friends. He was the same, except that outwardly he changed features and his appearance, so his disciples could see his divinity. And we know that sometimes we experience these mountaintop moments, and sometimes we experience some valley, deep in the valley moments as well. We wanted to talk to Troy today about his life, and he will share some of his mountaintop moments with us, but he will also share some of the low periods of his life. So thank you so much, Troy, for deciding to be open and vulnerable here today with us.
Thank you.
And share your story.
My parents were very young when they had me, and they were just like about 19. My dad was going in and out of jail. My mother was a young mother. Both my grandparents were dying of cancer, so she was taking care of them, and my aunt was still in high school. So she sent me to live with my grandparents on the reservation until she could handle it. So my grandmother raised me for the most part, which it was mostly a loving home, but it was difficult because there wasn't many mixed race kids on the reservation at that time, and it was.
So your dad is indigenous.
Yes.
And your mom is
French and Irish.
French and Irish.
Yes. So because they were the situation and my dad being in and out, there was a lot of a neglect, and my dad was the abusive drunk when he was out of jail. So it was difficult growing up with a lot of fear and a little loneliness. It didn't really get better. As a teen, puberty wasn't nice to me, and discovering myself took a long time. I guess I was a late bloomer, and I felt like I never fitted into any world. I was the black sheep of the family. Everyone played sports. I was the only one that didn't. I was the only one that wasn't good at anything. And the entire dinner family table was always sports, and I just felt like I'd never be a part of that. So I felt very isolated and alienated from the family for most of my growing up. So I kind of just kept to myself and did my own thing, and I didn't have any really friends. It went right up until almost like out of high school. I was beat up and tormented so bad that I would hide under my bed and pretend like I went to school when I didn't, because I just was tired of getting beat up every day. So eventually I dropped out in grade 10 because I just couldn't take it. And then I tried to correspondence to finish school, but then I didn't. I didn't go back to school till like I was 25 or 23 or something like that. Yeah, I thought I could live without it, and then I decided to go to cooking school later on in life, but you needed the paper to do that, so I got my upgrading and got through Fanshawe, and I was able to get into the program I wanted to get into. I worked really hard for it. I went through a lot of phases, almost everything you can imagine, trying to fit in. I was desperate for friends, so I would try everything, whatever was popular, I would jump on it, and whatever trends, I had to have it because I was just trying so desperately to connect to somebody. And we spend our whole lives, so much of our lives trying to fit in before we realize we're meant to stand out. It's just kind of ridiculous looking back at it now. Like, I wish I would embrace being different, but like, you're really kind of like isolated out if you don't fit into a clique or a group or anything like that when you're young. And then discovering, my sexuality as well was very, very difficult, because there wasn't even bisexuality, was only looked at as a thing back then. So I felt like I was always straddling this fence of being between two worlds that I was never allowed to belong to either one of them. It was too much for this one or too much for that one. And it was really like, it played a lot with my head because, you know, all the factions of life that we're told we're supposed to, like, kind of we get pushed into. If you don't fit into any of those, I feel that's what causes depression. That's what makes you feel like an outsider. That's what leads to a lot of, like, mental illness. I was, I'm about 15 or 16, like, or so when I experimented. Typical experimentation, just trying the odd thing, but it was never really a problem. Up until my grandfather passed away. I used to go out to underage, or all ages places where you could dance all night, and I never had any interest in substance, but after he passed, that was my first big loss, and I decided one day to try it, and try something a lot heavier, and I was feeling a lot of pain I didn't know how to process because I was never taught how to process that pain. I didn't know how to deal with that death at that time because I never really had anyone I loved that much die. So that was the foot in the door of substance abuse. And I eventually got out of it. I walked away from drugs, and I tried to not fall back into that pattern. But over the years of just drinking on the weekends and drinking because you have a bad day and because you have a good day, you kind of condition your brain to self-medicate, and that's what you relate to whenever you have those emotions. And then you don't really realize it's happening. It takes years to get into addiction because you're doing it so gradually that by the time you realize you have a problem, you're too far in. And then my grandmother passed when I was in hair school, and just turned 30. And she was my entire world, and I never really could deal with that, and not having her here has been the hardest thing to not. I just loved her so much, and she was the best person I've ever known in my life, and she made me be the best person I could be, and I just didn't think it was fair that she wasn't here. So I didn't take that well, and then it got really, really bad. And then I kind of just snowballed from that point. I got into a series of bad abusive relationships. It was around the time my grandmother passed, and somebody said I was with that if I ever lost my looks or gained weight, they would break up with me. So I developed an eating disorder, and I would starve myself or make myself sick, and then I started doing a certain substance to make myself skinnier, and that got out of control. And at that point, I was repressing everything because I still couldn't know how to deal with communicating or expressing my feelings of anything. So I was very closed off from people. People never really got to see the true real me because my mother always thought human emotion was a sign of weakness. So I've never seen her cry. I never seen her. She would be reluctant to hug me and get close to me. So I never really felt a connection with her. I felt alone. I felt the only person I really truly loved most in this world was gone, and it was that moment where I realized I was an adult, and I felt like I was alone in this world. My dad was still drinking at the time, so we didn't really have a relationship. My mom was very distant, and it was that transition to growing up, truly growing up, that I didn't know how to be an adult. I wasn't ready to be an adult, you know? So I was going to work, being up for every weekend, not sleeping, and cutting people's hair, and being completely drugged out of my mind. And my boss, and my coworkers, everyone eventually noticed, and eventually all the repressing that I had done over all the years, that back burner was full, and I had a huge mental break when I got into an abusive relationship where it started to get physical, and I told him, I said, I'm not going to be in a relationship where I'm physically abused, and I said, I grew up like that, and I'm not doing it, but he refused to accept that. So he decided to destroy my life, stalk me, stalk my friends, and it made me crazy, and I just snapped. I suffered PTSD. I was diagnosed with PTSD. It was like a strobe light flashing of traumatic experiences, and I'm reliving them all over again, and it wouldn't stop. I couldn't turn it off, and all that stuff that I had been ignoring is now fresh and it's all won't go away. Every time I close my eyes, I see my dad coming at me and strangling me, or somebody coming to hit me, and I had to be high every day just to get through a day, just to live through another day, because I still didn't know how to process emotion other than ignore it, but eventually you can't ignore it anymore. And the PTSD, like people told me, like you don't know what it's like until you have it. When you have it, you never wish you did, and it's very traumatic in itself. It took a long time for the flashing of memories to stop, and I wanted to stop, but I thought I was being smart at the time. I didn't know anything about addiction, so I thought if I just get a different substance all the time, that I wouldn't get addicted to one thing, not knowing that I'm just building this huge building block of addiction. But at that time, that was my breakdown just a month or so before COVID started. So at that time, I needed immediate medical attention for my mental health, but the whole world was shut down. So I had no choice but to self-medicate through lockdown after lockdown after lockdown, because there was no other choice besides to give up and die. It felt like the whole world had turned their back on me. It felt like I was just I felt like a piece of society's garbage, that people wouldn't look at me in the eyes, people would cross the street to get away from me, and I felt like, I just felt the lowest of the low. I had no self-respect or dignity, or my life didn't mean anything because society didn't just look down upon me. That's how I felt at that time. He's like, you need help right now? Well, too bad. And I remember I got diagnosed with colitis, ulcerative colitis during the end of the first lockdown because of the drugs and how poor I was eating and everything like that. And I went to the emergency room and I collapsed and nobody would help me up. And because it was COVID, I had to climb up the wall to get myself back up. I was hemorrhaging blood. My body was so inflamed it wasn't absorbing water or food. I lost all my body weight. I almost died, but nobody would help me. They think I was just there for drugs. So they didn't do the proper tests. They did just gave me an Adderall prescription and sent me home. I was right down the street from the hospital. I got lost because I was so delirious from the lack of nutrition. The longest I ever went without sleeping or eating or showering was I think it was 7 days. I had to fight a friend off me that tried to rape me. And at that point, I had given up and I wanted to jump off a bridge that night, so I called my best friend and said, I can't take it anymore. I can't take the pain. I can't take the suffering. But luckily, she talked me into taking a cab to her place. And then she's like, honey, do you want a shower?
Oh my God.
And I'm like, not really. She's like, honey, you smell like you crawled out of a dumpster. I'm sorry, but I love you. And I'm like, oh God, have I gotten to this point? And it was just that realization, it's like, what happened to myself? I remember walking by people on the street that were in my position and looking down like, I would never be that person. I would never use those drugs. I would never, how do you let yourself get to that point? But just a couple bad series of events or abusive relationship and boom, I lost my entire life. I spent 15 years building in less than a month. I knew I didn't want to live this way, but I felt like I had no way out. So I had no hope for a long time. And even though when I thought I was going to OD and I was okay with that, it didn't happen. I kept waking up. I had no reason. I lost everything. There was no reason to keep going. But I happened to watch the show Mom. And it's about a mother and a daughter that go to NA together and have very dysfunctional, trauma, And honestly, I didn't know those rooms existed. So I could do that. It brought up a lot of stuff I was holding in watching it. So I'm like, okay, so there's help out there. Maybe I should try that. I haven't tried that. So it took me almost a year just to walk through those doors. I got a friend to go with me for my first meeting. And so I decided I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I wanted to live a different way. And this has shown me a possible way out. And I really wanted a way out. And it was good. I went to a couple of meetings, but then I lost my friend of almost 18 years. And I didn't know what to do. It hit really hard. And I walked through the doors here. I knew this church was here. My aunt used to come here. And she's like, it's open. It's all, the only rule is kindness. She goes, you can go there. So I remember her saying that. So one Sunday I'm just like, I think I just need to go. And I walked through the door, And I sat in that pew over there with Jesus just beaming right on me. And I heard you say a sermon about, it was like literally pertaining to exactly how I was feeling at that exact moment and exactly what I needed to hear. And I felt so like my spirit had just been like needing, I had this hole I couldn't fill, but then I realized it was my spiritual needs that I needed filled. And not the material stuff, and not any of the other stuff we try to fill it with. Where, you know, Western society is all about, you know, money and having the next car and the next phone, but that stuff doesn't satisfy us because we need spiritual fullness. And I feel that I when I felt that, I knew that's exactly what I've been missing, and I just didn't stop coming back. And even after I had some slips, because nobody's perfect, this community reached out to me, called me, make sure I was okay, make sure I was safe, make sure I was not spiraling, and everyone, the love I felt, that love of community, I haven't felt in so long, and I felt I belonged, and I knew I was home. I knew this was my home. And I just kept getting encouraged that nobody was mad at me when I came there. Like, just get back, we just want you, don't worry, nobody's mad at you. And I was so scared to come back, and I thought I wasn't going to be loved. But I was welcomed back with open arms again and again and again. And that Trinity saved my life.
We watch our kids struggle in life with not being able to connect with each other socially. And there is a growing problem of mental illness, depression, because children have no sense of community. When we got to a point where, you know, we say we don't need church, our kids don't need church, we don't need religion. Sometimes what we're actually missing by stepping back from church is community. The good news about a place like this community, years ago we decided that the things that are important to us are kindness, respect, and fairness. And we have stood on those values and those principles through the years. It's such a diverse community, and it is such a vital community for people like Troy and other people who are seeking family, who are seeking a place where, like Troy said, it was no problem. I slip up and I'm embraced every time I come back in. There's no judgment.
A year ago, when I went into the NA rooms, I walked away from the only friends I've ever, my using friends, the only friends I'd known at the time. All my relationships were, I pushed all my healthy relationships I did have away. I had no self-respect or dignity. I had just the lowest self-esteem. I hated myself. And today, I'm 1 year in recovery. I have self-respect, I have boundaries, I have self-worth, I have people that love me. And I feel like I really have life's true riches now. I have spiritual fulfillment. I have the choir. I joined that by accident. I just asked a couple questions, and they're saying around I'm joining the choir, so I didn't like confrontation, so I was like, okay, I guess I'm joining the choir. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I love to sing. I love the people I spend time with here. I love everybody, everyone I connect with here in such a deep emotional way, and it's brought me out of my shell. 2 years ago, I couldn't go to the grocery store or be around people. I couldn't avoid eye contact. I couldn't talk to some stranger, and now here I am on stage trying to interview.
I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. The thing about it is that we don't know who's out there listening, whose life could benefit from the story that you shared today?
Well, I want to say that, it wasn't until after I opened about my stuff that people were comfortable to come to me and open up about the similar stuff they've been through. So don't hold back that. That's what binds us and bonds us as human beings. That's what the true human experience is about. And, when you know that somebody shares in your pain, you don't feel alone and isolated in it. So let those walls down, let the barriers down, and truly open up to another person, because that's the only way you really truly heal.